Carolyn here from We Teach Well. And today we're going to be looking into the issue of the digital divide and how it impacts parents and students in more rural and remote communities. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I work, the Yalukut Weelam clan of the Boonwurrung, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. We also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which our two guests work, and we acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to this land. Last year, we talked about what we were learning in relation to students and their access to education technology. We talked about the surprise shown by some when they discovered that not all young people were tech natives with devices. And we talked about the ramifications this will have globally and locally. When people assume that every school student is tech savvy when they're not, we're maintaining a system that sets many young people up to fail. It can have a significant effect on their work opportunities and their ability to navigate an increasingly virtual society. As always, students and families in areas of low socioeconomic status fare badly, as do students and families who live in rural and remote areas. Australia is a massive country, with the majority of the population living around the edges. Unlike Europeans in America who set out to explore and create communities inland, Australia's explorers more often died for their efforts. It strikes me that when I talk about rural and remote in relation to Australia, there is a much greater gap than may be found in other countries. So today we're talking to two educators who have experience in both rural and remote communities. First, we will chat with Emma Endicott. She's a public secondary teacher in Victoria who spent the last 18 months in a rural community. And then we will be talking to Catherine Newington, the education lead at ACS, Australian Computer Society, the professional association for Australia's ICT sector. Catherine has a master's degree in digital technologies in education, and her job is creating resources to help teachers implement the digital technology curriculum nationally. We had hoped to connect with a wonderful Aboriginal educator who works with remote communities. The difficulty in getting that to work highlights the problems that we are talking about today. So first of all, Emma, can you talk to us about your experience last year and earlier this year of the access to technology in the context you were in rural Victoria?
Yes, so I was teaching in rural Victoria. I started my graduate year there. I had 8 weeks of teaching experience, and then we went into our first lockdown. So it was a bit of a awakening to me, a very quick transition from traditional teaching to remote teaching, which no one had done at that stage.
No.
And thinking back on my students, then I was in a very rural community, a town of just over 1,000 people, and most of our students lived in the hills. So to say, so lots of students had unreliable internet. I remember I used to have a student that would walk to the top of a hill to access his classes. And he used to tell me when he was going to walk to the top of the hill so that I could send him the work at the same time. So it's just crazy. Like you were saying, in a metropolitan context, I think we assume that everyone has access to internet. There's free Wi-Fi pretty much everywhere. Go to your local shopping centre, there's free Wi-Fi. But in a rural setting, there's no such thing as free Wi-Fi. And a lot of people live off the grid off there with no technology as well. So it was very interesting.
Do you think there was some issues or problems that have actually been around for a while, but were just made more visible as a result of the pandemic?
Oh, absolutely. I think that there's been massive problems with bridging students to technology for a long time. I think that we think of like Gen Z and these new Gen Alpha now as really tech savvy
Yeah.
individuals, and I think we have this assumption that they're incredibly tech savvy and they know the online world better than their adult counterparts, but really they don't. A lot of them, of course, there's a lot of them that are incredible online, but there's also a lot of them that have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah.
And especially little kids, if we think of little tuckers, like 5-year-olds getting onto Zoom, that's huge. So
Yeah.
I think that there's a huge bridge between what we assume that they can do technologically and what they actually can.
Yep. And this has given people the chance to think about what is actual. And in a little minute or two, we'll move to what maybe we can do to make it better. But looking at the issues, I just can't get the picture out of my head of this child climbing up to the top of a hill to get their schoolwork.
Yeah,
It, yeah, it's blows my mind. What issues would you say are systemic and which are more environmental or contextual?
and then
So systemic ones, which are the idea that in our society we privilege urban over
right,
rural.
cool, great.
More money is spent in the urban areas than is spent in rural areas. They're the sort of systemic things. The others are environmental or contextual, is just these problems are tied to just this space.
Okay, I will talk about how there's only one Wi-Fi hotspot in all of my rural town.
Wow.
Yes, there used to be one, and it was only available between 9 and 4. Okay. So yeah, I think that there are problems, obviously, with the system itself. So I think about like urban areas. If you are with Telstra, you can get Wi-Fi from any of their phone booths. In my country town, there was one place that you could get a free internet connection if you did not have your own, and that was only available between 9 to 4 on very certain days, which is not. I don't think that's a great. I don't think that's a great divider and I don't think it's very equitable with a urban society. But yeah.
Obviously, funding is a problem. Are there, does the government provide things for rural students that they don't need to provide for urban students?
I think that there is a massive funding problem with rural schools, and it's really sad to see it as a teacher who used to work in there. We at my school didn't expect students at the public school to pay a lot of fees, a lot of co-contributing fees, purely because living in a rural area has a lot of unexpected costs. Like, for example, you do have to travel longer distances, so your fuel cost is a lot more. Your food is a lot more expensive, so it costs more to feed your children down there as well. So I think that my school took the approach of not having a lot of fees to subset some of those unexpected rural living costs. But then the government didn't pitch in a lot either. A lot of my buildings were very unsuitable for learning and very unstable environment to teach in. Whereas, now I work at a public school in Melbourne and the students are more looked after. And I guess it also comes with numbers. Rural schools do have less students. So therefore you do have a smaller voice, I guess, when it comes to problems, whereas a public or a private school, which has, larger money, larger number of students, bigger voices, I think that, of course, if there's something wrong, then more voices, more power.
Yeah. Were there any private schools down your way?
There was one about, they used to take the kids 60 minutes on the bus to get to.
Okay. We need to fix this. Clearly, we need to fix this. But we need to find, I think, both systemic and on the ground answers. I guess I'm a bit frustrated with the idea that we need to find strategies or we need to do some more research, because I think, surely we've done enough of that to know that there is a problem and we need action to correct the imbalance. Systemic issues can take a long time to correct, particularly in the context of federation. You've got a federal government that's got all the tax dollars. You've got state governments who are in charge of running the education, but not necessarily getting the chunk of the pie that independent schools or schools in a preferred state, for instance, may have access to. What can we do? What can we do to implement now? What could we do you think, um, to start dealing with this?
I think that we are not listening to educators as much as we possibly could. You know, at the end of the day, you can do as many research projects as you like, and you can listen to as many politicians as you like, but why don't we talk to the teachers who have anecdotal evidence, who are there, who are surrounded by it, who see the problems every day, listen to them, and not just listen to them, actually take their voices seriously and actually add weight to their voices. Because I think there can be a lot of shallowness in like coming and asking a rural teacher, like, hey, what do you need? Just to show face and just to be like, hey, yeah, well, look, we're doing something. But I think actually listening and actually actioning. So not only does it show that they are listening to us, but it also shows that we have a voice and our opinion matters. And rural educators do have as big as a say as metropolitan educators.
Do you think, I mean, last year, which isn't that long ago, people were suddenly beginning to realize that teachers might actually do things and that they actually might be important and maybe they actually do work quite hard. And people were talking about that. Do you think that has stayed, or do you think we are perhaps moving back to taking teachers for granted again?
I think that I really did enjoy that moment where, you know, we were rallying for our teachers and acknowledging the important work that they do. And I think that there's only positives that come with that. You know, when someone feels supported, no matter what industry that they're in, when someone feels supported by the community surrounding them, of course they're going to have better outcomes. But I think with alongside pandemic fatigue, I think that can sway a little bit too. Teachers do important work. My colleagues are incredible people. My colleagues are absolutely just superstars getting through every day. And look, we're all tired during this pandemic, and for teachers to be able to get on with it, readjust their curriculum again and present it in a way that students will hopefully engage with, I think that's just an incredible thing.
You won't get any argument from me, obviously. One of the things that I found at the EduTech conference was on just about 10 days ago, and it was all virtual this time. And I listened to a few of the addresses, and the thing that I noticed compared to the last few years where we've been on the periphery of education technology, I heard people who were involved in EdTech and who were creating EdTech talk about the importance of teachers. And rather than hearing about tech that was teacher proof, or, things that you could do that would remove the sort of centrality of a teacher, I was hearing the opposite. So even these EdTech heavyweights saying, we know that human connection is important, and that no matter what else we do, we have to take care of teachers and upskill teachers and do anything, because we've realized that you can't have good learning without teachers, human being teachers. And I think that was really encouraging, because we're all in lockdown and have been and I'm not in a school, I'm in lockdown. I wonder whether that is happening outside, whether that understanding of the importance of teachers is is still happening in the wider community. At your school now, where you're in an urban environment, do you think that is still, that importance of teachers is still occurring?
Yeah, I think well, the other day, I obviously wasn't at school, I'm in lockdown, but for those
Mm,
who were lucky enough to be at school, we obviously have some students who are being supported. We had a parent drop off heaps of baked goods and
yeah,
treats for us all, which is so nice.
yeah.
Seeing the picture did make me incredibly jealous, but it was a very nice. Um, it was very nice for them to do. And I have been, I still receive emails from parents saying thank you, which is just, it makes your day so much
Absolutely. Yeah.
brighter when that happens, when you know that your work is being appreciated. But I think we don't. I think as a society we don't need to dip from that support. I think we need to keep it and think back to how did we support teachers at the start of the pandemic and realize
Mm,
that this pandemic is still going on. Teachers are still doing their best. So let's keep on support. I think
mm,
everyone needs support, especially the students. The students need the support the most. They're really missing out on social connection. I
yeah.
think, if anything, learning online teaches us the importance of social connection and how
Connection.
learning is a really social activity.
Mm,
Being in a classroom is a really social activity, and you are learning all these social skills and you're socializing without even knowing it when you're in a classroom. And I think
mm.
that as beautiful as EduTech is, and I love it, I think especially in a rural community, socialization in young children and young teenagers is vital.
I think it's vital everywhere. Because we hear a lot about, and I must admit, every time I hear it, I want to jump in and correct it. We hear lots of people saying, "Oh, I'm homeschooling at the moment," and I was, "No, you're not. You're supervising your children's education. You are not homeschooling." Because homeschooling, which is a really big thing, um, they do all the teaching elements at home, but people running it, who have been approved by government to run it, um, deliberately put in those socialization activities during the week where they go and meet with other homeschooling parents, or they go and um, have picnics with other groups. So even people who are deliberately homeschooling, who are doing all of the learning at home and a lot online now, make they have to, it's a requirement that they include a number of socialization activities for the children, because that's often what the children miss the most.
Absolutely.
Mm,
Learning is I think at its core, a very social
mm.
thing. So I think that, while we are in lockdown and we do need to do the right thing at the moment, I think that when we go back, we shouldn't take for granted really how much our children need social
Social, yeah.
interaction.
I have twin nephews, and one of them just loves school. Don't I don't understand it, because my twins did not love school. But one of them, my nephews, just loves it. I mean, he would refuse, no matter how sick he was, he would refuse to stay home. His greatest achievement in 2019 was not missing a single day of school.
Amazing.
Now, his schoolwork improved online, but he missed the social stuff. So for learning, he's better off online, because he's like me, he's got ADHD. So it's for learning, it's better online, but for everything else, school's better.
Mm.
And I wonder, do you think that's a sort of hybrid model might be useful for students in a rural community?
I think a hybrid model would be very successful anywhere if the infrastructure is there and the infrastructure is accessible for everyone, which would take money and it would take support and there would be huge teething problems. But I think a hybrid model is awesome. It gives students a bit more choice, a bit more student voice in when, how, and why they learn. But it also keeps those cores of socialization strong. So I think hybrid's absolutely fantastic, but it does need to be equitable for everyone.
And that goes into what I was going to ask about, and that is the infrastructure. So when we talk about, are there things that we can do on a micro level, each that teachers can do in their classrooms, that's one thing. But when we're talking about rural and remote, there are infrastructure things that are required. I mean, we're not going to get that. We're not going to be able to reach that equity unless we have more towers, unless we have more coverage. And that's going to have to come from governments, isn't it?
Yeah. I also think that in rural settings, there are people who do want to live on the land and they do not want towers as well. So I think we do have a broader problem, not a problem, so to say, but a broader issue. Yeah, with the way people see education and technology. I think as educators, we've really embraced it. I feel like we've been, we have to embrace it at the moment. But, you know, expressing that as well further into the community further, saying, hey, look, edutech's actually really good, let's give it a shot. I think we do have to convince the communities that surround children as well. I think teachers get that there is a great value to it, but I think we need to now start promoting it to the broader community as well and saying it's great.
That was something I hadn't thought of. So can you, did you have any specific examples of that from last year? That idea of people in the community who didn't necessarily want more infrastructure.
No, there's certainly people who enjoy living a lifestyle that is off the grid. I personally could never do it, but you know, there are people and that's what they've chosen. They've chosen to have a more organic and a more earthly lifestyle, and I think that for them, remote learning and edutech would be an incredible challenge and almost something that they'd oppose. Yeah.
That is interesting because I would love to live off the grid. I have this idea of building a straw bale house and a community of old women who are doing all sorts of fun things off grid, but with internet.
See, there are people who don't like internet.
I couldn't live without the internet.
There's some people who have never connected to the internet still living in Australia. So we have to consider those people as well. Those people will have or might choose to have children as well. Where do they sit in this new learning environment?
That's a big question.
Sorry.
Okay. That's something we have to think about. So even if, so I think I remember you saying last year, because there was talk at the beginning of the year of making laptops and dongles available for students who didn't have access to those things. Now I'm imagining the dongle would only work if there was a tower close by.
Yes. So the dongle would connect to the laptop and then you'd need to be within proximity of a tower to get it.
So it wasn't going to help a lot if there was no close tower.
Yeah. Well, if you're on a farm, you've got reception, I think, at the front of your farm and then not much.
Or the top of the hill.
Yeah, the top of the hill, poor kid.
All right, that definitely is something that I hadn't thought about. Is that there might be people out there who don't like the internet. I
Remotely
can't.
connected.
I don't understand that at all.
Well, I guess if you've never been around it, then it's not something you can miss.
Well, no, but I mean, I grew up without it. I only got access to it very sort of late in life.
Yeah.
But I love it.
Same.
So, in wrapping up, I'm going to ask you a question, and it can be something we've already talked about.
Hmm.
What is the one thing that you think needs to be done to start reducing the inequity? If we could get one thing that would help.
I do think that there is a funding issue between urban schools and regional schools and remote schools. And I
Yeah.
think looking at that funding model and looking what's actually happening in those schools, getting into the core, talking to the teachers, talk to the business managers, talk to the principals, and say, hey, why is your per student budget so low compared to these city schools? Because at the end of the day, every child deserves the same opportunities as
Absolutely.
another child. So if we are able to look at ourselves critically and look at the infrastructure around these regional schools and look at the support systems around the schools and harnessing these to make sure that we have the best outcomes for the students, I really don't think there's any wrong in that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Because it's again a thought that just struck me, um, that rural schools would have lower numbers
Yeah, we do
and
have lower numbers, much
and
lower.
therefore would qualify for less money.
Yeah, so funding works per student, so you get
That's right.
a certain amount per student. So if you're a rural community, ultimately you do have lower numbers, so you're going to get lower funding compared to a city school who purely by catchment will get a lot more students. So of
Mm.
course there's less money being funneled towards a rural school.
And even if there are fewer students, that you still need a similar number of um, qualified teachers to
Yes.
teach in particular subjects.
Yes.
Hmm. So money.
It would help. Like I don't think it's going to cure all problems, but it would
No.
definitely give them a good start.
Yeah. And that's what I asked. What would you think that the first thing, just one thing that you think would be a good way to begin?
Yeah, I think, government support. I think a
More
lot of
money.
government support is tied to government money. And I think
Mm.
relooking the funding structures would be a really lovely way to start, and listening to teachers and looking at the infrastructure and being really critical.
Yeah. Thank you, Emma. As always, it was delightful to talk to you, and you raised a couple of things that I hadn't considered. So that's always good. But thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me back.
Catherine, can you talk to us about your experience of delivering all things digital to teachers in remote communities?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me today. So I work with teachers right across Australia. And what I found is that some of the teachers that I've recently connected with are living in remote areas and really struggle to connect with other teachers. So their professional network isn't as big. And also the access to face-to-face professional development is also really lacking too. So these poor teachers who are really willing to get out there and try to improve their teaching practices are stuck because they don't have that professional network that we have, and also don't have access to gaining that network through face-to-face interaction. For me, one of the things that has brought me closer to these teachers is actually COVID in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So because we've been able to work with more computers and technology, that teachers are a little bit more savvy with that. And what I would normally do is go and connect with teachers face-to-face in schools. But now I'm opened up and using virtual platforms and still connecting with them now. And I've spent some time having some conversations with them and just helping them connect with a professional, just to help them at that beginning point to bounce ideas off each other. That's probably one of the biggest things when you are looking at digital technologies teachers. A lot of the times they are the only teacher in their school that is running that program or that subject. So they can't just have that professional, bouncing ideas off each other and that support to build a really quality unit of work. So one of the things that I'm really proud of is just being able to support those teachers in the context that they're in and being able to improve their professional knowledge. So I'm working with a teacher in a remote school, Indigenous school in WA, and I'm working with another teacher in Cairns, which isn't as remote as the one. I think the one in WA is about 2 hours from Broome, so it's properly remote. But some of the issues that I have with a teacher in Queensland is not necessarily, it's the lack of community that you have behind you too. And so I found that, they're really similar struggles that they've had, but I've really enjoyed working with both of those teachers and boosting their confidence and excitement to teach too.
So those teachers in these remote areas, do they have the same access to good internet and good connections?
Yeah, just starting off with the actual technology that's available to them. I was quite surprised with that. Actually, yes, they both do have really good connection. And I'm in inner city metro Melbourne, and sometimes my internet plays up more than they do. So I'm really glad to see that, governments and schools and departments are starting to invest in those really remote areas to ensure that we can get our students connected. It's not completely 100% because the gentleman that I work with in Queensland, he has some of his students who are they're boarders at the school, so they live on campus. And when the first wave hit, where we had to go completely back and do the remote learning, he really struggled because some of the communities didn't actually have any internet access. So he was printing off physical, lessons and things like that and sending them through the post. And so, there was even those particular challenges too. But as far as a school goes, what they both have is probably more than what I had in an inner city school in Melbourne a couple of years ago. So, there is things that are starting to happen in some of these remote areas, but I think we've got a lot of catching up to do.
Have you found particular remote areas where you just can't get connected?
Not yet. So look, and I've only been really connecting with a lot more teachers outside of Victoria over the last couple of months, but I am finding more and more teachers do have access to, teachers just themselves would have access to the internet, and they've got some devices behind them too.
So, and talking about the school inland from Broome, it's an Indigenous school you mentioned.
It is, yes.
So the school has access to good internet and digital. Do the students, when they go home from school?
That's a really good question, and I don't know at the moment. So I don't really want to make an assumption on that, but it would be interesting to see what's actually happening in the outer community. So our schools are greatly funded, but if that access stops at school, then what is going to happen when they're trying to do their homework, or we want to do more learning with technology? But it's that point of going, can we continue that learning outside of the physical school environment?
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because when I think about this, my very first reaction is, let's have an NBN that is actually an NBN. Let's have a national broadband, network that is actually national and not just an NBN for people for whom it's easy to connect.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
And so my thought is that what we need first? Do we need governments to put resources in to make sure that there is a blanket coverage of our country, which is a really big one before you can actually talk about fixing some of the other problems. First, I thought, at least if we could fix that. So obviously funding is an issue. We've seen a consistent growth of public funding to private schools who already have plenty of money, and a corresponding drop to public schools, many of whom don't even have their basic requirements. But is funding such an issue in remote communities? I taught at a school, a boarding school in Queensland for a while, and many of those students, both Indigenous and white students, came from remote properties. And I think the government covered much of their cost. But when they went home, we're talking cattle stations and all the rest of it. Would they, that was 10 years ago, and there was no question that they didn't have access.
Yeah, I think one of the things is that, as you mentioned before, getting that infrastructure right, because if you don't have that right infrastructure, you can't go forward. No. But I almost feel like it's probably like a little bit of a two-way street happening, because you need to have the infrastructure because you can't go forward, but you also need to have the right professional development for teachers to be able to understand how to learn with digital technologies, and also passing that knowledge onto the students and that wider community too. Because when you're looking at remote communities, and it's something that's even said in inner city Melbourne too, is that parents and families, those previous generations didn't have the technology but still learned okay. So there's also that shift in mindset that has to happen in the community to then show that there is that value add of education through digital technologies, because you could create an amazing infrastructure, but if you don't have the people that are open to use it, then it's just kind of fall to the wayside.
I was really surprised, and I shouldn't be. I keep getting surprised. It's an issue that comes up when I was talking to Emma, who we spoke to before, and I had raised with her the idea of just getting some more towers in and making sure that the internet was available, because she had a student who used to have to climb to the top of the hill once a day to connect to the internet and download the resources. And she pointed out that there are many families out there who are not interested in being connected to the internet. They don't want towers in their town. And so that's another issue that I hadn't considered in that difference between rural and remote and city. There's almost, there are so many places you can go to and get free Wi-Fi in town.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also, there's 2 points that I want to start discussing is the equity versus equality debate. And I think that that's something, especially for remote areas, is going to be very different. So, the needs of inner city people like us is going to be very different. So I think we need to shift away from what everyone should have versus how do we support those who might need a little bit more than us. And it really is just about, as I said, like ensuring that when we roll out programs and digital technologies to other, schools and, those communities that need it more than others, that we provide them with that ongoing support too. So, when we roll out the one laptop for everyone, is that actually right for someone who might have 3 laptops at home, or could that money be better spent putting into a remote community that needs that one-to-one device, but also then putting extra money in to ensure that the parents are on board, the community's on board with it too.
Can you speak to the differences in funding in remote communities at all?
No, I can't. No.
I just wonder.
And do you know what it would be? really interesting to see where that funding does go
Mm.
and how much is going towards it. Because I mean, ultimately, in a, let's put our rose-colored glasses on, that we'd want every child to be able to have the right tools to learn. But,
To learn.
that's, yeah.
And the right tools to learn in whatever context they're going to have to learn in.
Yeah, because there have been some times as well where even just looking at the right type of technology for the remote community, I did a couple of weeks of volunteering in East Timor in a proper remote, mountaintop village. And one of the things, we went into the classrooms, and one of the things that we found is that, all of these amazing laptops had been donated by schools, which is great. But what they didn't factor in was the humidity and the heat, and a lot of the robotics behind it, something as simple as the connections between a key on the keyboard had actually stopped working. So, within a couple of months, these machines and the technology had become obsolete.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to type something without the letter O.
Well, yeah, that's right. And I mean, I remember in the early time, as they, when computer rooms and stuff were being introduced to classrooms, it's sort of late 90s, early 2000s. Those rooms had the best air conditioning in the school.
Yeah, I remember that too.
They were all they were cool. So when you went in, everybody wanted to go there in the summer, because in order to keep the computers running, they kept it at a low temperature, which is, now I begin to understand why that is. Okay, so when you look at the issues, if there are issues that you for getting connected, which ones are there? Ones which have actually been going for a while, but we didn't notice, and it wasn't until COVID that we actually became aware of things that we hadn't otherwise been aware of.
I think for me personally, looking at from a point of view of a teacher and also someone who supports teachers now, is the big one for me is those teachers that are in remote areas that don't have access to build their professional network. I think that's one that came to light. And it was really great that I was able to connect with some of these teachers via Facebook groups to say, I need some help with this. And then I went, I'm your girl, sign me up, I'll certainly help you. And it wasn't really until then that I was like, these teachers are doing such an amazing job by the challenges that they have to overcome by, again, like unpacking the curriculum, finding their professional development and going forward. Like, you do what you can at the time, but just how they're overcoming that is absolutely amazing. And, I just really want to support more remote communities and know that I can now do that. And I am still successful and don't have to be face-to-face with these teachers. So, the Zoom and the virtual meetings that I've had with these teachers have been just as valuable as a face-to-face session with teachers too.
And it makes it so much easier, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because you don't have to plan times, or, there's so many things that make it just, I think, a really good platform for working with teachers. I'm not sure, and you taught in a primary school before you started. Do you think it's the same for the students?
Oh, good question. Yeah, I think that, look, I think we only know what we only know. And so, the experience of growing up in a remote area versus in a city would be starkingly different. But I suppose, it just comes down to, you only know, especially growing up, you only know what you know and what your experience is too. As a primary school teacher, I would always make it known that there would be, people in remote areas, and having that opportunity to go to East Timor and show my little kiddies where people lived and the difference. And, this is the reality of some people's lives. I think just even that awareness is giving them an understanding of what's happening in their world.
Yeah, it's a big one. We need to fix this. we need to find both systemic, and I'd like to ask you about that, about systemic inequalities and on the ground answers to these issues. And I think we talked about this last year, and I think we're beyond talking about strategies. We're beyond, let's have another committee meeting to find out what's going on. I think we know what's going on. And I think we need to come up with actions. I think we need to not talk about things so much as actually do some things. But just before we go there, that idea of systemic inequality, is that as apparent in digital education?
I think it would be very apparent, and I think the technologies especially over the past 2 years, has highlighted the issues that we have.
Yeah.
You know, as something as simple as not every school would have the devices to take home to do remote learning. And therefore, you know, if you've only got that school with a bank of laptops, then even that compared to another inner city school that has got access in one-to-one devices, I think the last 2 years has highlighted and brought into the light just how inequality and how different it is in some areas, and especially for those remote areas too, and where they need that support.
Yeah, I found it. Again, Emma was saying how, and this, she was in rural Victoria. Now, Victoria is the smallest state, and a quarter of the country's population live in it, but it's only comparatively relatively small.
Yes. Oh, in comparison to other ones. Yeah, absolutely.
You know, to Western Australia, Northern Territory, or inner, you know, Queensland and New South Wales. And she said that where they were, only just a few hours from Melbourne, there was one place in the whole town that had free Wi-Fi.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
One. And that even though they were given the laptops and dongles, they didn't necessarily have that, couldn't necessarily use the dongles because there was no coverage where they lived.
Yeah. And I think that idea of, you know, the build it and they will come does not work and does not apply at all to digital technologies. And, you know, if we keep just throwing devices at teachers, at students, or anyone who's trying to learn, it will be ineffective because you're not bringing in the pedagogy with that. You're not bringing in what it should look like and modeling good learning with the technology. And again, you've also got to bring on board and bring the parents and the community on that journey too. Particularly,
I would say, in rural and remote.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
I in talking about that, one of the things that I think I have seen when I look at all of this new technology and how schools have got BYODs and all of these others. And you look at there are ICT teachers who teach those classes, but the ICT technology person, not so much. So, you know, you would go into a class and you could spend half the time waiting to try and get a technology person to come and work out why the students couldn't get into their computer or things like that. And it gets back to, I guess it gets back to that funding. If you want to have really good digital work in schools, you don't, one person who spends most of their time putting out bushfires and finding, you know, the rollerballs from inside mice, or, you know, the thing that some students taken. You need to put some money into putting more of those people on the ground.
Oh, absolutely. Because, even regardless of where schools are situated, whether it's rural or remote or
Mm,
even inner city, is that if you don't have those trailblazers and the people there, that ground level that is supporting the full rollout of the technology, then it's just going to be very, very expensive dust collectors.
yeah.
There's yeah, one thing that I've certainly reflected on in the last couple of years and really have really pride myself on is when I first got the role at ACS 3 years ago. One of the things that I really advocated for is a non-cookie cutter style of a program
Mm,
where I would just pass it out to teachers and go, here's your cheat sheet to teach the digital technologies curriculum. But instead, I've made it in, and I connect with teachers, I build resources with teachers, I get them to trial it. But one of the very first things that I always say is, how can we help you in the context of your school?
mm,
Because every school is going to be different. And it opens it up then that when I did start to connect with some remote teachers, it didn't shock me at all. There wasn't it really, it didn't really make much of a difference to the way that I proceeded with the program, because it was almost exactly the same. And it's like, right,
mm,
you've got this amount of kids, you've got low literacy skills, or you've only got a limited amount of whatever it is. That's okay. We can work with it, because I
mm.
can't roll out resources and expect teachers to have one-to-one iPads or one-to-one laptops. And so it's always for me been about, what does your school have and how can we move the teaching and develop your school skills to help empower the
Mm.
students.
And that's I mean, that what you've just said, of course, is the underpinning that all educators understand, but often nobody else does.
No,
Is
yeah,
that idea that every single school is different, every class is different. Your own class can be different from one week to the next. Um, and certainly, you could have 2 year 10 classes that are
polar
substantially
opposite.
differently. And this understanding that you need to meet and build pedagogy that works with what the students know or don't know, rather than coming up with these digital products
Yes,
that could be really that sound as if they'd be really helpful, but there's no one in the school who knows how to use them or teach with them or how to get the students linked into them.
yeah.
Um, and I would think we need more of those people. We need more understanding of that, because then perhaps people will say, hey, you need to put more money into these areas.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that, teachers, well, they'll try anything and they'll do it. And I think, yeah, they're just where those gaps are. So teachers can identify where those gaps are. And I'm sure that if we interviewed every single teacher across Australia and even just said, where is it that you need help with and what resources do you need? I'm sure that they'd be able to identify that straight away.
Mm,
And I was reflecting on some of our conversation just before and talking about the funding. And I think there's a lot of assumptions are made on
mm,
what teachers need. And I think, yeah, as I said, I think it's, if we gave teachers that opportunity to go, how can we improve your school? Just imagine what those possibilities
yeah.
would be, rather than being restricted and tunneling that funding to spend it on something in particular, which may not be a highlight of that school.
No, and may have issues like the school in Timor where the laptops are fine, but it's too hot and sticky.
Yes,
And if you
yeah,
don't take,
absolutely.
you know, and often we see people talk about, and I mean, let's face it, it's happening again, where people who have no idea are talking about what our curriculum should include and what teachers should do and what schools should provide. Um, and it's a perpetual.
Yeah. Oh,
Uh,
this is just something it's an issue that's always been around. And,
it's
unfortunately, the people that are high up making those decisions aren't teaching at the ground level that you and I were in, and don't understand the trials and tribulations and the issues that can and the spot fires that can happen in a day for teachers. And I think that's always been an unfortunate missing link.
Yeah, and it makes it difficult because they make these grand statements and plans without realizing, teachers differentiate constantly. And teachers have been differentiating before people talked about differentiating, because you've got all these young people in front of you and they're going to do things that you don't expect. It's I find that frustrating for teachers in the classrooms. So systemic things, and let's face it, we are talking about systemic problems when we start talking about remote communities in Australia, particularly Indigenous communities. There are systemic issues that affect the way things can be done or are done, and they're difficult to correct, particularly on the context of federation, where you've got a national body, but you've also got states and territories. Now, I only discovered not long ago that it was during the Second World War, I believe, that the states gave the federal government the right to collect taxes because it was easier to keep it on a national level when we were looking at supporting a defense force and the war. I'm really interested to find out whether they expected that to be a permanent arrangement, but it's become a permanent arrangement, which means that the Commonwealth government are collecting the taxes, which should be paying for all of these things. But the state and territory governments are running the education system in their state, in the K-12 field. And I wonder, how do you get around that? What can we do as educators, as teachers on the ground with what we have? What can we do that will make it better as we fight for the bigger fights of getting those more systemic inequality things out of the way?
I think something to support teachers is to open it up to be able to connect with teachers that are outside of your school sector, and almost join together and help build lesson plans and be able to share resources and swap lesson plans and be able to pass on assessment pieces and things like that. I think that would greatly help teachers, because at the moment, a lot of states, you're not allowed to actually share any of the lessons that you create, because the intellectual property is owned by, say, the State Department of Education. So there are many teachers who have been told that they can't share outside of their school the resources and lesson plans that they have created. And, imagine how much better it would be if we opened that up and allowed teachers to share and swap lesson plans.
Well, when you look at something like TPT and TES, that's what they're doing. Teachers are having their own shops on those platforms, selling these resources that they're creating. And I think you and I have talked previously about what's going to happen when we start to talk about the legal ramifications of who owns the intellectual property.
Because at the moment, technically speaking, is that the school that you work for owns all the lesson plans and resources that you create, because you're creating them. If you create it using devices that you were given in the time of your workspace, then technically speaking, it is owned by the school, and the school decides how you share or don't share those resources. When I first started in my job, I had to do a lot of research around this, because In the UK, they have a program called CAS, which we married the program off, and you've got teachers right around the UK sharing resources, sharing lesson plans, and you can imagine, like, there are thousands and thousands of resources for teachers to use for computer science. So just for the Digitech curriculum, there'd be like, I think they had like over 40,000 resources the last time I checked. We wanted to mirror that, but we couldn't because I had to do some research, because UK is one country, whereas Australia, yes, we're one country.
Actually, UK is not. The Scottish in me is saying, no, no, there are four countries.
England, the England part, they had to change it for Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. So they started off with the English part of the UK, and then they did have to change things to suit the countries that are found within the UK kingdom. But you know, that's probably then similar to what's happening in Australia, that Australia is one country, but how it operates is state by state. And you know, there are different rules for different states, and I wanted to ensure that I wasn't crossing any of those boundaries. And so the way that I got around that is, rather than the teachers writing all of these lesson plans and resources, I do the hard work, which teachers absolutely love. Imagine having a little PR person writing your unit of work for the term. No problem there.
We're in.
Yeah, I know. They loved it. One school called me their fairy godmother of planning, because, you know, imagine just having someone write you a unit of work and it pops up in your inbox over your school holiday so you can relax. But I made it that way because of the issues that we have with sharing resources. And it's even at the top level. Yes, you've got your state, but even within your states, you've got your independent schools working separately to your Catholic sectors, to your state sectors too. And so every single sector is closed off. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is creating this community that is not bound by state and not bound by sectors. So, you know, you can meet a teacher in WA in the independent sector and connect with a Tasmanian teacher who's working in the Catholic sector, and just be able to support each other.
I keep when that thing about the UK, because, you know, going into that idea of size again of Australia, the United Kingdom, all four of them, can fit into Victoria 2.5 times.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So we are the second smallest state, and yet the whole of the United Kingdom, with millions and millions of people more, can fit 2.5 times into the size of Victoria. So you're starting to then get an idea of just how big. And then when you think we've only got comparatively the very small population, mostly clinging to the edges. Patrick White, in his novel Voss, based on the explorer Ludwig Leichhardt, made that comment about the European settlers clinging to the edges of the country. And they look at the inland as this dangerous space, which I find very interesting, because in other countries, they look at the inland as a safe space and the ocean as a threat. We seem to have got it, well, the European Australians seem to have got it round the wrong way. But there was something I was going to ask you on that, and my little red herring took it from my mind, but it will come back. In your role at ACS, in your position in ACS, you would be aware of discussions around technology in other areas, not just in education. So in health and wellness, in the health industry, in finance, and all of those. Are there similarities to the issues faced by all Australians, or some Australians, in the rollout of the digital technology?
Yeah, so one of the major issues that we have in Australia is the decline of the domestic talent of our IT professionals.
Yeah.
And so you can imagine, and that's the issue that we're having is that the increase of technology and using technology in the workplace is obviously increasing. But the talent that we have as domestic is on the decline. That's very, very different to lots of other countries.
Yeah.
So, there's ACS publicises something called the Digital Pulse. So it's an annual publication that looks at the landscape of IT within Australia. So each year they use a different theme. And it compares Australia's stance to other countries. And unfortunately, we're at the lower end. Like, even though we're more of like a modern country, that there are countries that are surpassing us, which even surprised me. And that goes then, imagine then the trickle-on effect that we would have with our decreasing domestic talent that we have, with the type of technology that we can use to boost our economy. If we don't have those IT workers, and I think it's been highlighted even more that when Australia shut our borders, we shut our borders to all of those overseas IT professionals coming in. So it'd be really interesting if we already saw a decline, what's happening within the landscape of Australia now.
Yeah, I heard them talk about, I read somewhere, and it may have been in the ACS bulletin, about a new sector of visas being offered to people who had specialty in privacy and digital security things that they would get, they could apply to immigrate based on having these skills that we don't have. My question would be, though, why don't we? I mean,
that's one of the questions that we're trying to solve.
And if that is the case again, then why on earth did the government cut all funding to universities for the last 18 months? Why were our public universities who would train these IT professionals, why were they not given support? Thousands of teachers, because they're not just academics at university anymore. There are actually teachers, and so lots of those teachers were losing their jobs. So how do we fix this problem of declining ICT professionals with cutting off funding?
And I think this is where it's such a big issue than what we even think it is too, just by cutting that funding. But if we look at the issue is at the moment, if we work backwards, currently at the top we don't have enough IT domestic talent. We then go back and see that our domestic talent within universities is not there. And if we go back again into high school now, is that we are not getting enough students coming through for that IT talent. And then if we go back a little bit further into primary school, we're seeing then that the students aren't being exposed to that technology and teaching it. So that's kind of where that was one of the major issues that ACS saw. And that's why they chose to create this program to be this advocacy piece to support that long journey that we have. And I know that there are teachers out there that are doing amazing things, and but it's this massive big issue. And I think issues like this, when it does come to education, is that from year one to from 1 year, we're not going to see results. We're never going to see results for a little while. Those little grade sixes that we first started off with, they're probably only in year 9, so they haven't even started to think about an IT career yet. There is a lot more discussion around IT careers, but it's a big issue.
It is, and I think too. One, it highlights that thing that we have often talked about, that idea that people judge the success of a school and teachers on the results in this ridiculous test they do at the end of a year or whatever, rather than understanding, which I think educators do understand, is that to judge a school or teacher's efficiency or effectiveness, you have to wait 10 years,
Yes.
maybe 15.
Yes.
You're not going to see that. There may be simple results, that super ones that come out, but in a real sense, for the real efficacy, you're going to have to wait. It's not
Yes.
going to be in the moment. And the other thing that I'm interested in here is, I don't remember what class I was in, early secondary, maybe. Why I thought this would be interesting, I don't know. But I remember telling a teacher that I wanted to be a computer programmer. And she told me that she couldn't think of anything more boring. And I didn't think that was boring. But I have to say, one of my sons took ICT at high school and gave it up because he said it was the most boring subject he had ever done. And it shouldn't be.
No. Oh, I see ICT like as an opportunity for problem solving. Like you look at how much technology is used in society now and how many problem solving that we're doing just with it in an everyday society. We need to bring that into the classroom. So I look at ICT as an opportunity to problem solve, to look at what's happening in society and have that real world relevance to it. But giving students the opportunity to be creative with those solutions that just happen to be using digital technology to solve that problem. And I think that a lot of the units of work and material that I create is more about that student-driven project rather than click this button, do this, and just reading instructions. Following instructions to code is not going to entice people to continue on with ICT. But if we gave them that opportunity to experiment, to just have a play around with things, and to look at that technology, the digital technologies curriculum, as a potential of helping the common good, I think you would see massive changes. And that's something that I try and advocate for.
Yeah, it's I see a fair bit being done in some really interesting stuff teachers are doing in primary school. And I wonder whether particularly with ICT, there's two ways you can get a teaching degree in Australia. So one is that you do an undergrad in a particular subject area. And then you apply to, well, I did a DipEd, which was just that year of education studies. And now you could do a Master of Teaching at Melbourne. The point of it was that you had, in that idea, was that you had a really solid subject knowledge to add your education stuff to. And the other way is to do a 4-year BEd. And from what I have observed, and it could certainly be wrong, what I've observed is that people who have done it as a BEd don't have as much time playing with their subject stuff. And I wonder how that would affect ICT teachers who are teaching ICT. If they hadn't had that time to play, if they had never had the opportunity to play with technology, then how can they make students get excited about it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think even as teachers, we each have our own passions. And, I'll be honest right now and say my passion was not English at all. So then I think I've just been unfriended. But
your time will come.
It was one of those subjects where, look, I would teach it and I would bring in as much as I could. But you put a digital device in front of me and, oh, man, I would much prefer to teach that. And I think one of the things is that, teaching is such a master of so many trades and so many disciplines that it's really hard to, kind of try and do everything at once. And, we talk about this crowded curriculum, but I think it comes down to crowded expertise of the curriculum content.
Yeah.
So, trying to be an expert in geography and science and English and maths and digital technologies, especially for our classroom primary school teachers like myself, who had to teach everything.
Yeah. And so often in high schools, you see it happening that new teachers, and we've talked about that because that's what we're focusing on building is PD to help teachers who are teaching out of field. So English teachers who have been given an English class because there's a whole how to schools work and where funding happens and what courses are specialist and which ones are generalist, and around all of those things, you'll often find the Japanese teacher will have a couple of junior English classes or a history class, and the PE teacher might have a science class or a maths class, or which they didn't go into in depth. And they're then trying to make up for what they didn't know. They can't. I mean, because they'd spend all this time getting very good at one thing. Well, some did too. I did one. English and literature, and that's it. It's all I know. It's all I can get excited about. Well, I do get very excited about the digital side. So what do we need to do to provide teachers in a lot of those remote areas with really solid, good, helpful professional development that helps them actually be able to sort of be confident in their classes?
I think we need to be open, not have that cookie cutter program, be open to changing that. I mean, as teachers, you and I both know that, we are experts in being able to modify our teaching practices for our students. Professional development needs to do the same thing for their teachers. We can't just have that one cookie cutter. And I think then it needs to be an ongoing relationship with these teachers in the remote area too. And, you don't just want to have that one day professional development and off you go. No. I think that you need to be there as the professional development provider, is that your relationship, especially with these remote teachers, needs to be ongoing for at least 2 years. And the reason why I say 2 years is because you've got year one where they're practicing and they're building. Year two is that they're using the knowledge that they gained last year to adapt, and then there'd probably be enough confidence to kind of go off on their own. And I find the teachers that I work with for 2 years are able, a lot of them are in their first year now, and they're at that stage where they're playing around, they're learning the curriculum, and I will certainly be there for them in year two to help them critique their craft.
But also, I'm imagining what we need to think about and talk to people about in those remote communities is what sort of ongoing professional learning networks do they need? How can we, are there ways we can provide links to groups of teachers with similar issues? I mean, I'm just thinking it's not even just in Australia, but you might find there's a school in the Northern Territory that has similar issues to the school in Timor, or in another country. And I guess one of the things that digital allows us to do is maybe help to connect those teachers in different places to give them those professional learning networks.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're in the process of creating a brand new platform for Digitech teachers, and we're creating like discussion and network forums for teachers within this one platform. And I think I need to now create a little area discussion forum for remote teachers.
Yeah. And I think we need to Yeah, I think maybe we need to too. I was talking to the group the other night that you were in. We're looking at PD, and this idea of perhaps creating some sort of virtual staff room
Yes.
that could reach teachers in remote areas, that they could sort of just, when they had the availability, they could, connect and just talk to other teachers.
Yeah.
Well, Catherine, as always, a huge amount of really valuable insight and information. We're going to be talking about the digital divide until there is no digital divide. So it's
So forever then.
yes. So both of us have a real interest in making sure that students and teachers everywhere have access to the very best materials to learn, to teach and learn. So we'll be talking about this for a while. And I'm really, I don't know if we're meant to say it, but I'm really looking forward to working with you, because we're going to do some professional development on how English teachers and literature teachers can use the digital curriculum in their English classes.
Yes, and using technologies too, again, combining those two areas.
Two things, yeah.
And giving teachers some practical examples and, ways that they can take it back into their class and continue changing and using technology for learning purposes specific to English. I'm really looking forward to that.
Me too.
And I think knowing that we both want to support all teachers too, and we have this, really similar thinking about supporting teachers everywhere, is that I think that we'll be coming up with some really valuable content for everyone.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And there was one person made a comment as I was preparing for these sessions, and it's one that I have sort of started, but it's obviously one I need to put more time in, talking about finding teachers in remote Indigenous contexts to talk about it. And one of the people who is part of my network said, you just need to build the relationships. And obviously I know that and understand it, but yeah, maybe I need to put more, make it more of a point of action to start speaking more to teachers in these remote places to see how we can, work with them and what they need.
Yeah, I agree. And just being able to, how can we bring on those remote teachers when we are doing a face-to-face? The question that I'd probably be asking myself now is, how can I support those remote teachers who physically can't get to where I'm presenting, but how can I still include them in for the day, whether it's doing some recordings, having them live stream and pop in and seeing me, just having a laptop there instead. Because I think the great thing about technology over the past 2 years is how much it's evolved and how much confidence teachers have had into now using online platforms that those teachers didn't use before. So prior to having to go to remote learning, there are some teachers who probably would have never picked up, or had a virtual meeting, whereas, look at how many teachers, especially in Victoria, are still in that position now.
Yeah. It's I find the potential that the virtual world offers to be super exciting.
Yeah. I mean, nothing beats face to face, but when you've got these teachers who can't get there face to face, what's the next best option for them? I think is now a question that I'm going to be pondering and trying to answer.
And I'm thinking exactly the same. I need to do some research on it with teachers in remote areas. What is it that they would find the most helpful? What is it they really need? Because we can talk about wanting to fix it, but maybe we need to find out what they want to be fixed.
Yes. Yep.
As Lauren Sayers said once not long ago, she gets a whole lot of emails from people offering solutions to problems she doesn't have. Thank you again, Catherine. Thank you for your time.
Oh, not a problem. It's always a pleasure speaking with you and connecting with you.
And you, very much so. Thank you, everyone. That is We Teach Well's final event for the DIF 2021. Again, it has been a really interesting experience and one that we have really enjoyed and are very privileged to be part of. We look forward to seeing you all again in 2022.